Right now, beneath the streets of Seattle, there is an entire city that nobody uses. Original storefronts with shelving still bolted to the walls. Sidewalks that have not seen sunlight since the 1800s. Glass skylights, now purple from decades of chemical decay, that once let morning light pour into a pharmacy or a hardware store. And here is the part nobody tells you. This was not an accident of history. It was a real estate maneuver executed under the cover of a public health crisis by the men who already owned the most land. The buried city is the receipt. To understand what actually happened, you have to go back to Seattle in the 1880s, before the fire, when the city was barely holding itself together. Seattle had been built on a tidal flat. The original downtown sat just barely above sea level, and the entire infrastructure was a disaster hiding behind good lumber prices. The streets were wooden planks laid over pilings. Beneath them ran hollowed-out logs used as water pipes and sewage lines. When the tide came in, twice a day, the pressure reversed. Sewage shot backwards through the pipes and erupted from toilets like geysers throughout downtown. By 1882, the city health commissioner had documented the problem, but nothing was done. The men who owned the most land, men like Henry Yesler, whose sawmill had made him the city's first millionaire, largely lived on the hills above the stench. Meanwhile, the city's population was exploding. The arrival of the Northern Pacific Railroad in 1884 opened Seattle to national markets. By 1889, the city had grown from a few thousand residents to over 40,000 in less than a decade. Buildings were packed close together. Streets were dry. The fire department had never been seriously tested. On June 6, 1889, a 24-year-old Swedish immigrant named John Back was heating a pot of glue over a gasoline fire in a cabinet shop basement. The glue boiled over onto a floor covered in turpentine-soaked wood shavings. Back panicked and threw cold water onto the burning pot. The water hit the superheated mixture and sent burning liquid in every direction. The fire spread unseen, racing through the hollow space beneath the wooden streets, traveling block after block underground before bursting into open air with enough force to shatter glass across the street. The volunteer fire department arrived and discovered the water mains were privately owned and inadequate. Mayor Robert Moran ordered buildings blown up to create fire breaks. The explosion sprayed burning shrapnel onto adjacent rooftops and made things worse. By the time the fire burned out, it had consumed approximately 25 city blocks. The Fry Opera House, the most expensive building ever constructed in Seattle, was gone. Banks, law offices, hotels, warehouses, all ash. Financial losses were estimated at $20 million. 0 people died. The next morning, more than 600 of Seattle's civic leaders gathered to discuss what came next. One banker named Jacob Firth told the crowd they would look back on the previous day's fire as an actual benefit to Seattle. The crowd cheered. City leaders made 2 decisions. First, all new construction had to be brick or stone. Second, and this is the one that buried a city, the streets would be regraded, raised up to 22 feet in some places, using rubble from the fire and fill blasted from the surrounding hills. The chronic sewage problem, the tidal backflow, all of it would be solved by lifting the entire downtown core above the tide line. It was framed as a public health initiative, and the drainage problem was genuinely real. But the moment the announcement was made, something interesting happened in the property market. Landowners with capital waited. Landowners who could not wait. The smaller merchants, the tradespeople, the immigrant business owners who had lost everything, started rebuilding immediately at the old grade. They had no choice. They could not afford to let their lots sit empty for years. so they rebuilt on ground that would eventually sit one full story below the new street grade. Block by block, the new Seattle rose around buildings already constructed at the old level. In some places, the elevation difference was nearly 30 feet. Merchants found themselves looking up at the street from what had effectively become basements. Temporary wooden ladders and bridges connected the new sidewalks to the old storefronts. Women in full 1890s dress climbed those ladders with groceries and children, while the city above continued to take shape. The city did not compensate them. Within a few years, the underground spaces were sealed off as the new Seattle solidified above them. But before that happened, they had already become something else. The 1890s were the years of the Klondike Gold Rush. An estimated 100,000 people passed through Seattle between 1897 and 1907, every one of them needing to be fed, equipped, and entertained while waiting for a boat. Below ground, in the sealed old storefronts and interconnected passageways, a different economy was running. The underground was dark, unmapped, and invisible to police. Gambling operations relocated underground when heat came from above. Opium dens ran in the old basements. Some buildings maintained dual operations. The respectable entrance faced the new elevated street. The actual business happened below. The men collecting rent on those underground spaces were, in many cases, the same men whose names were on the new brick buildings above them. It could not last. In 1907, bubonic plague arrived in San Francisco, and Seattle's health officials moved fast. The underground was declared a public health hazard, full of rats, dark, wet, never properly mapped. The city ordered the tunnels closed. Workers bricked up the entrances one by one. And then the original city of Seattle simply ceased to exist as far as the street-level world was concerned. Nobody thought about it for the next 50 years. Then, in 1963, a Seattle Times columnist named Bill Speidel published a piece about the underground passages and announced he planned to explore them. Around 500 people showed up and pressed $1 each into his hand for the privilege of coming along. Speidel was not just curious, he was fighting. Pioneer Square was being targeted for demolition under urban renewal plans. The city wanted to tear it down for parking lots and modern development. Speidel understood that the only argument capable of stopping a demolition plan was a more compelling story about what was already there. He took people underground and let the city speak for itself. Visitors descended into rooms that had not seen daylight in 6 decades. The original storefronts were still there, counters and shelving intact. The glass block skylights, set into what had been the sidewalk, had turned purple over the decades, a side effect of sunlight reacting with manganese in the glass. Standing beneath those purple lights, looking up through them at the faint shape of people walking on the street above, visitors felt something no textbook had managed to communicate. They were looking up through the floor of the city that had swallowed the one they were standing in. The tours became enormously popular. Speidel gathered signatures demanding Pioneer Square be designated a historic district, using the underground itself as the argument. Seattle designated Pioneer Square a historic district in 1970, among the first cities in the country to take that step. Bill Speidel's underground tour still operates today. The rest of the network is still down there. Some sections have been excavated by archaeologists, some have been incorporated into building basements, and some remain exactly as they were sealed, brick over the entrance, whatever was left behind still inside, standing in complete darkness under several feet of street. The official tour narrative is warm. It talks about resilience, about a city that rebuilt faster than anyone thought possible. Those things are true. Within a year of the fire, 465 new buildings had gone up. Seattle's population actually increased during Reconstruction. The new city was cleaner, better drained, more rationally laid out than the one that burned. But walk the underground today, and you are also walking through something else. You are walking through the physical record of who paid for that transformation. The spaces that sank were disproportionately the spaces of people who lacked the capital to wait. The spaces that rose were held by people who did not. The street raising was real public health infrastructure. It was also the largest transfer of relative urban value in Seattle's early history, executed through a process that the people who designed it also happened to benefit from. The city raised itself up to 22 feet and called it progress. Then it sealed the evidence underground, bricked over the door, and walked away. And now, if you pay $15 and follow a guide down a staircase in Pioneer Square, you can stand in the room where it happened. The counter is still there. The shelving is still bolted to the wall. The original skylight is overhead, its glass turned the color of a bruise, and through it comes the muffled sound of people walking on the street above, just like they always did, not knowing what they are walking over.